Moving now into variable parameters. So variable parameters, similarly to global parameters, can be accessed using RMSP.variable params. The default value of the variable parameters is just empty because by default we haven't specified any variable. So in order to manage variable parameters, it's going to be slightly different from global parameters. So with global parameters, we typically go to each property and specify and just overwrite the global state of the global parameters. But for variable parameters, we have certain utilities within RMSP that kind of facilitates the setup of the variable parameters. And the utilities are RMSP.domains for categorical variables and RMSP.variable for continuous variables. So again, let's take a look at how the behavior of the plots are right now. So let's copy this and paste it in here. So right now we just have the global parameters in effect. So we just change that and this looks like the globally set parameters. So let's modify copper. So in order to specify parameters for copper, we can create a copper variable. So let's call it cu equals RMSP.variable. And within the variable, we can specify a name and a column. So those are two different things. So for name, we can give the full name of the variable, and the column we have just to make sure it's the same column that is in our data. So in our data contains copper cu, so we have to use the exact same name because that's going to be the column that we are going to look for when using this variable. So this creates a variable, and we can straight away just set some variable parameters. So if I look inside this function, the parameters that I can specify are these. I usually just copy and paste and start modifying what I need to modify. So first of all, color limit. So if we look into our copper, the values go from somewhere probably close to 0 to something slightly above 10. So let's specify the color limit to be between 0 and 8. Number of significant digits, let's just use 3. CMAP, let's use the new CMAP here. Let's use the rainbow. Color map log, let's not use it. This is to control log scale on the color map. Axis limit, so this controls the limits on the axis that is used for copper. We can see that it goes from 0 to something slightly above 12. Let's just specify 0 to 10. Let's not use axis log for now. We can specify the units. So for instance, we can say that copper is going to be percentage. And we can also specify how we want to label copper. So this property requires us to specify a variable key and a unit key. And we can specify how we want to show the unit. Let's just put it in between parentheses, and we're not going to specify v time. So if I run this, it's going to create the copper variable. And now if I take a look at the RMSP.variable params, it has copper in it. Usually we don't need to worry about variable params because it gets automatically set every time we create a new variable. So now let's take a look at how this distribution, these plots look like. So if I copy it in here for first the CDF plot, so now what we can see is that the axis limit is no longer going to slightly above 12, because it's being controlled to be between 0 and 10. We can see the number of significant digits has changed to 3, and we can also see that the label now show copper and show the unit, which is being specified by these two properties. If I plot the section plot, now we can see also that the color map has been changed to the rainbow color map, and also the color limit. So the limit in the color scale is between 0 and 8, which has been defined by the CLEM. For instance, we can also check our composites. So within our composites, we have other variables. Say we have element A. So let's also specify some parameters for element A. So that's going to be RMSP.variable. And then we are going to call this element A. Again, this is just the name, doesn't need to match the column. And the next argument is actually the column name. So this is the one that should match. And then let's set variable parameters, and let's copy and paste this in here and start changing things. Let's do color limit. Actually, let's just comment this out for now, and let's just take a look at how it looks like. So comps.histplot element A dot column. Again, so if I go back to copper that we have defined already, so copper is an instance of variable. So copper has a property called name, which is the full name, and has the property called column, which is the actual column associated with copper. So here we are specifying element A. So if I want to access the column for element A, I just have to do element A dot column. So this is going to plot a histogram of element A. I just want to take a look at the limits of this variable. What would be reasonable? So it has a very long right tail in here. So what we're going to do actually for this variable is to use a color limit of 001 to 100 because we are planning to actually use log scale. So let's set the color map to be using log scale, and also the axis to be using log scale. And I should also specify the axis limit, and I'm going to use the same as the color limit. For the C map, I want to just use spectral R, which is the same as the global parameter. And for significant digits, we're going to use 2, and I'm not going to specify unit or label. So if I run this cell like I just did, and now check again how my histogram is looking like, we can see now that the properties that I have set for element A is being used to format my histogram. First thing that we can see is that the axis limits is between 0.001 and 100, and we also have the log scale, just like we controlled in here. So that's how we can specify specific parameters for element A, specific parameters for copper. And if you have that consistent, your entire workflow will be using the same properties. So now that we have specified 2 different variables, we can take a look at the next object within RMSP that handles variables. So that's going to be RMSP.variables. So variables is just going to be a container for multiple variables, so we can combine them into groups. In this case, I'm just going to call it modeling variables. And it takes a name, which is the modeling variables name, and it takes a list of the variables that I want to combine. So that's going to be copper and element A. So, and then I'm going to call this variables. So variables is a RMSP.variables object named modeling variables and contains the two variables copper and element A. What we can use these variables for is to loop over variables usually. So for var in variables, then each one of these var within this loop is going to be one instance of the RMSP.variable. So that means we can access the column and we can access the name. So let's just take a look into that. var.name and column is going to be var.column. So if I loop over the variables, I have this as an instance of variable, which means I have access to the name and I have access to the column. Sometimes it's not very common to be using the name. Most of the times we just want to iterate over the columns. So in that case, we can use for var in variables dot calls. So this is going to return the columns. So var is going to be already the column of associated with that variable.